greenhouse people? We are back with another episode of Tech on Demand, where our goal is to help you grow your best crops ever. I'm your host, Bill Calkins, and throughout 2026, I've been catching up with different people in the professional horticulture space to find out a little bit about their careers, passions, journeys in the world of plants, and much more. I'm calling these conversations Pick 4 because I sent each guest a list of 12 questions, and you guessed it, they picked 4 to answer and discuss. Although this episode's going to be top-notch, I do want to encourage you to jump back in the archives and listen to the previous ones as well. I think the range of guests and their experience really highlights how awesome our industry is. But anyways, today, I'm excited to be joined by my buddy Mason Day, the Vice President of Business Development at J.R. Peters Company and Jack's Fertilizers. Mason and I have been friends for a long time, and we've actually worked together in various roles in the past. But what's always impressed me about Mason is his passion for learning and experiencing new things. He's always ready to step out of his comfort zone, and that usually seems to lead to growth in his life and career. But I'm sure we'll get into some of that throughout this episode. Mason, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, Bill, thanks for having me. Really excited to be on the Tech on Demand side of the podcast.
Oh yeah, and I'm excited to have you. But before we get started, can you tell the listeners a little bit about your role and maybe a quick chronology of how you got there? Because you grew up in the industry, but you've done a lot of different things before becoming a VP at J.R. Peters at what I consider a relatively young age. So tell us a little bit about that path.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Mason Day here. My path in the industry hasn't necessarily been linear, I would say, but I've definitely touched a bunch of different angles on it. And you're right, Bill, I did grow up in the industry. I think a lot of people, more and more people are knowing that about me or know that, but I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize that, because when I was probably, I don't know, making a name sounds like I was making a name for myself. But when I was introducing myself to people in the industry, I was not working for a family business. I came from a small greenhouse operation. When I say greenhouse, I always have to kind of work around this. To everybody else, it's probably a garden center. I don't feel comfortable calling it a garden center because we only sold plants. But it was a retail greenhouse in Emily City, Michigan. So yeah, my parents operated that, for 30 some years. And I spent every moment of free springtime working and helping out in the greenhouse. Then decided that I was going to get out of the industry. I mean, it's kind of one of those situations where I don't know if you either really want to do what your parents do because you don't know what you want to do, or you're like, I definitely don't want to do what my parents do. And I was in the latter camp of I think I was really good at school. And so when you're really good in school, you get pointed down you should be a doctor, lawyer, engineer. It's those three things that they're point you in this direction. So I liked science, picked the engineer route, at least from an idealistic point of view, and went to college with the idea I was going to be an engineer. I think I was about a week in when I realized that engineers, that while are very necessary, it was not for me. I'm a people person. At the end of the day, I like talking. Dangerous to have on a podcast.
Right.
I realized that, while I love science, I needed something that connected more with the people. And I had applied as an agricultural student to Cornell with the design of, hey, it might be a little easier for a guy with an ag background to write his essay about ag stuff, and got in and was going to transfer majors to chemical engineering. And then, like I said, a weekend was like, actually, I really enjoy all of my classes in the ag world, and stuck with that and graduated in 3.5 years and went to work for Ball Horticultural Company and did a bunch of different things. We worked for Pan Am for a time, worked for Ball Floor Plant for a time, was heavily involved with kind of getting trials out to landscape growers for bounce. And then and that was in the midst of the impatiens, downy mildew kind of crisis. Everybody's trying to find a solution before we had the genetics. And then, worked with Seth Reed, who I'm sure I know on Grow It for about 7 years. And we kind of built this app and technology. And it was really about connecting consumers to the industry, because at this point, this was really before the houseplant craze. I think the industry was struggling to find a common language with the end consumer. And I think we still struggle with that in a lot of ways. I think the workaround is that the end consumer has become so interested again in the products that we have that despite us not necessarily always knowing how to speak to the consumer, we're able to make a living. But we're getting better at it. We're getting better at it as an industry. And so while working at Grow It, I met Carrie and the folks over at J.R. Peters, and we had kind of worked together. They had sponsored some stuff on the Grow It side, and things were kind of winding down at Grow It. And Carrie was like, hey, we want to hire somebody like you. And so I said, okay, very interested, loved working with Carrie on the projects we had. And I came on board there to do some very kind of a jack of all trades type deal where I was doing a little bit of selling, doing a little bit of our messaging and marketing. And then, kind of just evolved into, what does the company need and what do they need from me and what can I help out with? And so I spent a lot of time, and that was during COVID, peak COVID. Right. So I started with J.R. Peters in January of 2020. And 2 months later, the world falls apart and you're sitting there and you're like, oh, wow, the needs that this company had 3 months ago are very different from the needs that we have today. And as with many in the industry, we saw an explosion of activity and interest from the consumer side, which trickled down and through is that growers were needing to grow things quickly, more product being ordered than ever before. And so really it was like, okay, how do I like systems and I like picking things apart and figuring out, what are the challenges? What are the solutions? So started really working with the team over there to kind of identify how do we become more efficient at what we're doing from a production side, from a getting things out the door side. And that translated into working with distributors and our key accounts a lot more, larger growers, that type of thing. And then that sort of just evolved into where most of what I do or was doing on a daily basis was connecting with distributors and customers. And that's kind of where I've just kind of taken that now is to figure out really the big part of what I do is there are growers across the country that have, 1,000 million, whatever big number you want to throw out there, fertilizer requirements and needs for what they're doing. And while I'm pretty dangerous, I would say now, of recommending fertilizer, really where my specialty comes in is connecting our technical team, helping people figure out what they need. And then at the end of the day, figuring out how do I get it to them? Because we sell through distribution and figuring out, who are the right distributors? Where can we get a truckload of this, a truckload of that? And how do we help growers across the country? And, one of the things that we kind of that I brought, to the forefront is that really it's the grower first is our mentality. And so that's kind of, and that's where when you were saying, hey, this is our goal of what Tech on Demand does, I think that's, a heavy goal of what we are doing at J.R. Peters is that it's all about helping find solutions for growers and making sure that they have all of the tools to get the job done, especially at the plant nutrition level. So that might be the most brief biography I've ever given.
No, but it was really, really good. And I think, when I think about all that you've talked about and where you're at now, it's really building these roadmaps, like you said, making the connections, assessing the needs, figuring out the right path to solve that problem. And I've got to believe you've learned that or you've developed those skills throughout all of the different things that you've done in the industry. And so I look at your upbringing in the family business, what you did in college at Cornell, your internship and then employment at Ball, your early career, and then now at JRP. So I guess looking at those different levels and it's kind of a trajectory up, where was the most growth? Where do you think your most growth personally was in that chronology?
I think there's two areas that I'd highlight because I think they were different. Is definitely the first one. And I look at this and they say you bill you age, right? But not linearly. I think it's 34 or 35 or no, 33 or 34. All I know is that I'm past it now, 35. So I won't have an aging spurt for a few years, but they say that's when you okay, you're 34 a year, you get older quicker that year and then it slows down a little bit. But I think learning is the same way. I think the goal is to always be learning, but you will have moments in your life where that increases rapidly versus the other times. And the first time for me was, when Seth and I started Grow It. This was something entirely new skill set, while sure I had some marketing tools that I'd picked up from doing social and other things, that whole concept of we're going to start a business within a business. We're going to try to talk to the end consumer, be a B2C company within a B2B company. That required me to learn a lot about how consumers work, how technology works, data, how to analyze data rapidly to make decisions on what we should be doing. So that's number one. And then number two, I think, is when I started with J.R. Peters and figuring out just, I went from a plant company, Ball, even though we were doing Grow It, which was like a tech division. So to this is a term that I don't really like, but I'll use it because the listeners will connect with it, is hard goods, right? I went from a live goods company to a hard goods company. And so there are a lot of differences. There are a lot of similarities, but there are a lot of differences in like, okay, hey, this is a manufacturing company. How do manufacturing companies work? How do we get product out the door? How does distribution work? Working, at Ball, the distribution company is inside, right? You walk down the hallway and you can talk to one of your biggest distributors. For us, every distributor is a third party. So, and that's where, it's a lot of fun, but at the same time, it was like, you're learning a different language and a different skill set, not to mention the chemistry portion of it, right? Like I mentioned this earlier, is I was always interested in chemistry, and a lot of chemistry involved in fertilizer and plant nutrition. But for the majority of the last few years before I came on with J.R. Peters was working with consumers, and that's going from a soft science into a harder science. It's had to brush up on my chemistry skills and ions and solubility, but a lot of fun. But yeah, those two definitely the biggest kind of growth periods for me, I think.
No, that's cool. And I would have guessed those, and being your friend, I would agree that that's when you probably grew the most, and it probably went along with personal life changes as well, right? In those same two sort of inflection points. But
yeah, that's pretty fair, Bill. I mean, I think I was, if I had to tack on marriage and kids, I think they like shortly follow those two intervals. So that's it. I never thought about that.
Yeah, but these things happen for a reason. All right, let's dig into these 4 questions because we could probably talk all day. Question number 1, what do you love most about your job?
Yeah. All right. So I touched on this a bit with why I stuck with the industry and decided not to go on to engineering as a college major and career. And I must say, still value those careers, but it's just, I love people. And that's part of my job that I love the most, is that I get to and some people would probably hate it, is that I'm on the phone a lot. I'm on different calls, different meetings. And yes, there are a lot of meetings that could be emails in the world, but I enjoy talking with distributors, growers, people that have in this industry, we're dealing with living products on the front end, right? Even fertilizer, yes, not a living product, but it's going into a living product atmosphere. And for me, there's constant challenges, constant hiccups. And I love that I work for a company that is entirely focused on the solution side of things. How do we help people to have a better outcome than they did last year or last week? And so that's where, for me, number one thing is getting to help the people on the front end, which is, the growers across the country or the world, really, and to the people inside the office. My folks on the technical team are fantastic. And, I think they are crucial to everything that we do, and they bring great insights, and they're cool people to work with. And, I work remote, and I think that that's the most challenging for me, is that I wish that I was closer to my coworkers. But yeah, my team and the growers that we get to work with every day, definitely the best parts.
No, that's cool. And I think a lot of people in our industry would agree. It is the people. And I think that makes a lot of sense. All right, moving on to question number 2, which I'm interested that you picked this one, because I guess in my head, I'm like, you're a young guy. You haven't been doing this a long, long time. But if you go back and look at this chronology that we've laid out over the last, 10 minutes, you've done a lot. And there's a lot of opportunities within that time to just get worn out and to get kind of beat down, or to feel like, and part of maybe an interesting angle I think it's going to be fun to explore in this question is you've done a lot of different things. So it's not like you've done the same thing for 20 years or 15 years. But the question is, what advice would you give to an industry veteran currently dealing with burnout?
You answered it in asking it, Bill. That's great. No, I don't think
that's not what an interviewer is supposed to do, by the way.
No, but I'm saying I don't think you even knew I was going to say it. So no, I think that's exactly it. is that this industry is so diverse in what happens, right? So like we have the live goods on the front end, the hard goods on the back end. We have all kinds of, there's B2B, there's B2B to B2C, there's B2C, there's all sorts of different things that are happening. And I think that's how you deal with the burnout, is that like, if you are having a period of a month that you're just like, man, I'm just dragging, that switch it up. And I don't mean like, oh, go find a new job. Like, I think that's the quitter's mentality, is like, I don't like what I'm doing, I need to find a new job. I think, but it goes to, like, if I get worn out from trying to work on, custom blends or this, like, then I'll be on my laptop and I'm like, hey, we could be working on a consumer fertilizer formula that does X, Y, and Z. Or it's like, hey, I'm going to get out of my basement office and I'm going to go see some growers. And if I was a grower, a lot of that is probably more monotonous of like, hey, we have a crop to churn out for spring. But I would be thinking about, what other things can I grow? What new challenges? And two, our industry, because of the way it is, requires a lot of advocation, whether that's at the politics level or the national kind of Congress, like get in front and talking to your lawmakers, or if it's like at the community level. I think that there is and that's one thing that I've never shied away from, and maybe to a too much extent, is that I have a hard time saying no, but I find myself on a lot of committees, boards, etc. And that to me helps keep things fresh, is that, I spend a lot of time working with American Bloom. And to me, that is like, if I'm like, oh, I'm running into a brick wall on a project, then I think about it, flip topics. I'm like, oh, let's think about American Bloom and the challenges that are there, and how do we work on some of that, because it's different. And that's the beauty of this industry, is that the fix to burnout is really easy. And if it's like that, there's always an opportunity to travel, because you can learn something from anybody else. But then if you've traveled too much, there's always an opportunity for things that need to be hashed out, whether it's from a scientific or research side, or just reading about the research that's being done. So I really think that that's it. Just, you got to keep switching it up and have a bunch of different focuses. And our industry really, really allows for that.
I love that thought of one of the ways to get out of monotony is to find something to be involved in related to the industry.
Yeah.
I mean, you can find a million things that aren't related to the industry you work in as well, but I like that idea of giving back to the industry, doing some advocacy work, even like you said, reading new research, do a webinar. Like, we're in this industry for a reason, because we like it. Like, most people will agree that, I like this industry. So there's different things that you can do to sort of expand your knowledge within the industry or expand your reach. And I just think of some of the growers that I've known for a long time that haven't gotten burned out, some of them significantly older than me, is that they've been on committees. They've been involved with American Hort or OFA back in the day. They've been involved in their local associations. They've decided to be a columnist for Grower Talks. Like, there's a million different things that you can do to like just kind of change it up a little bit, but still do what you do and do what you love.
And that's where, like, even at the smallest level, like, I think about it this way, is that, we talk about reading research. These researchers are working on challenges because they see them as challenges in the industry and trying to help the businesses and growers in the industry. And I think that we don't always do the best job of following up. And is that, if you want to get involved and don't know how, go out and find some research that's interesting to you, read it, and just send some questions to the professor or the researcher that's working on it. Because I think so often
they would love it. Yes, they would love that. Like, the application of the research is why they're really doing the research.
And I think that gets you into some conversations about, they're going to ask you questions and be like, well, what do you see? Would you be willing to, trial this out for me? And it gives you something different to think about and look at. And that's something that, like, I guarantee you that if you reached out to a researcher, they're going to get back to you. Like, this is horticulture. This isn't, big pharma where, your emails are going to go into a black box and never read again. So that's, if you don't know where to start, great option.
Yeah, I like it. All right. Question 3, which is interesting. I've asked this question to a few people now who didn't grow up in the industry. And now I'm asking this question to someone who did. Like, you've probably had to, you don't have to explain this to your family. Like, you don't have to sit down with your grandma and explain what it means to like grow, like that people grow plants and they end up being sold at a garden center at Home Depot. Like a lot of us have to when their grandma thinks they don't have a real job. Shout out, grandma, but she might be listening. But anyways, how do you explain our industry to strangers, friends, or other family members who were not in the greenhouse when you were a kid?
Yeah, I think the way that I explain it, and it probably it gets off the rails pretty quick, but it at least opens up to questions, because then people are like, okay, is that anything that really doesn't have to be processed, to any plants, take all plants, anything that gets planted that doesn't have to be processed for food and beyond. And so what I mean by that is like, really, you're talking about corn, soybeans, rice, potatoes, like the grains. Like, I don't consider that, what we're necessarily working on. I think it's adjacent. I'm sure they have issues. Like, horticulture is anything that's pretty, anything that's planted for for functional use, and then also your gardening. And sure, yeah, you can come back and say like, well, tomatoes that get planted in a massive field and harvested. Sure, but most people don't think of like tomatoes like that. They think of tomatoes that they buy at the farmer's market or like being grown in a garden. And so that's how I lay it out, is that like, it's actually most plants that you will interact with on a daily basis, because it's your grass, it's your garden, it's the trees in your yard. And I was like, they all come from somewhere. It's funny. Our industry is constantly fighting to be seen and heard over big ag. And most of the living plants that are felt, touched, seen, smelled on a daily basis by all people are horticulture related.
Right. There are stuff. Right. They're not soybeans.
Yes. So that's how I like to explain it. It's like, it's the plants that you will see, touch, feel, hear on a daily basis. I mean, maybe not here, but we'll see.
One of these days, maybe. We'll pitch that to Rooted in Solutions. All right. Final question. Yeah. I feel like we're going to have to, I'm interested to see where this goes, because you and I have had these discussions for hours and hours and hours. But what is something about professional horticulture that annoys you, and how would you change it?
Yeah. So this one, like, this has been an annoyance of me for a long time, and I don't really know how I would change it. So maybe this is a good question for the listeners, is that I think while our industry, one of the benefits that it is diverse, and there's a bunch of different things that are happening and interests, and, whether you like edible crops or you want strictly purely ornamentals or natives, like there's an environmental focus, there's a food focus, there's a community focus. One of the things that kind of does drive me nuts is sometimes how fragmented that the industry is. And I think about it is to get products from point A to point B. We struggle with that sometimes. It's like, I got a lady in Maryland that needs, hanging baskets, but I don't have any. But I know that garden centers are flush with them in Michigan. It's not easy to ship plants, but it can be done. I think, 30 years ago, you'd say, well, you can't order plants online and get them to your door. You certainly can now. And I think, we're talked about Rooted in Solutions, like Firefly. There's talking about things that you didn't think would be possible in the world of plants, and that's there now. But I think that as far as, the industry goes, I think there's a lot of fragmentation. There's a lot of specialization. And while I think that is good and required sometimes, I think we do sometimes go above and beyond on that. And I think that some businesses could do better by looking outside of this is what I do, and thinking, what more could I do? And I think that would help to their employees, and think, we often hear of like, oh, how do I keep and retain good employees or find good employees? And I think that if you're only going to grow one kind of orchid in this greenhouse and we're never going to do anything different, that it becomes a challenge. You have to find somebody that's really interested in that singular orchid and do this. Yeah. But as we kind of generalize a little bit and come together more as an industry and think, how does this fit inside the whole picture? I think that we realize that we have a lot of similarities, and our employees are more interested in what exists beyond the front door of our business.
So what does a non-fragmented industry, what does a non-fragmented version of our industry look like?
It's a great question.
I'm struggling because, like, I agree, we're very fragmented. I mean, we have annuals and perennials, but like, I'm trying to think of what it would look like if it wasn't so split up, like cross training of people, or, I mean, I don't know that we need greenhouses that have more product in them, but maybe more partnerships. Like I feel like fragmentation you can overcome with partnerships of different businesses in the same region. I don't know.
Exactly. And that it kind of goes back into, I talked a bit about like hyper specialization, but I think overgeneralization is also a
Mm,
contributor. Is that if I'm a plug grower and I grow all the plugs in the ball floor plant catalog, and the guy
mhm,
down the street is a plug grower and he grows all the plugs in the ball floor plant catalog, we both have, let's say, I'm going to say 50 square meters of
mhm,
production space. That's not realistic, but it's an
right.
easy number. And we are all trying to grow all of those things. I only have a certain amount of volume and now I have to compete on price. Like,
Okay. Yeah.
so, whereas if I was working with the guy down the road and saying, hey, listen, what are you really good at growing?
Mhm,
Let's focus there and also like kind of share some insight knowledge, maybe even do some like, hey, I got a grower that's really good at X, Y, and Z. You're not too far from me. Like, I think they'd be a great fit for what you're doing. Like, I don't want to say share employees, but like to help our people and help our industry cohort come together. Now
right.
that's maybe idealistic, but at the same time to try to say like, okay, how do we focus less on competing with the guy next door
Mhm,
and figuring out how do we work with the guy next door to have a better select? Because at the end of the day, we're always like, man, we need to have more value for what we're doing.
yep.
And if we're all just trying to cut each other's throats on pricing,
Yeah.
we're not fixing that problem. And so, like,
Right.
I don't know, that's an easy solution for me is that, it's working closer together. And I think that makes more sense, right? Because we're an industry that doesn't really make sense from a logistical standpoint on how
Right.
product gets produced.
Yeah.
We have seeds that grow into plugs, then somebody else buys a plug, grows it to a finish liner, or sorry, a pre-finished plant, goes to a
Mhm,
finished grower, goes to a garden center. Who's to say there shouldn't be somebody that does, like, I don't know, if there was a consortium or a co-op that's like, hey, all of these plug growers kind of handle all of the plugs. And it's like, versus just saying like, okay, you get all of your plugs from one grower. Maybe it's you get all of your plugs. They come from one location, but it goes to a central shipping house. Like, I don't know.
yeah.
And that's where I don't really have the solution for it, but
Right.
it just becomes a challenge where, when you have so many products and they get sold and touched at so many points,
Yeah.
like, it's an easy way to add cost, but not necessarily value. And I think that's the fragmentation issue is that
Yeah.
we add a lot of costs without adding the value to like increase or increase the value.
Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully, I don't know. That's a word salad. And like I said, I don't know what the solution is because
Right.
I understand that there are businesses that have been doing things for 20 to 30 years and not suggesting that they shouldn't exist or
Mhm.
anything. But it's more so, how do we work closer together versus trying to crush somebody else in the industry?
Yeah. Well, and I think it takes a perspective like you have to see the inefficiency and the competition that leads to just price cutting or the need to cut price to compete. And we've seen kind of small, not even small, sometimes large examples of what you talk about in action in different places like Kalamazoo or and used to be in Colorado. They had a pretty good network of where you could fill a truck with multiple products coming from different greenhouses, a little bit up in the Pacific Northwest, but those are isolated areas and probably could be even more, I guess, even more of a variety of product and diversity within those areas, covering all bases. So no, I think that's something that should annoy a lot of people. And if it does annoy more people, then it will eventually get solved because we're going to have to, because labor costs are going up. All your input costs are going up. Like, we've got to get more efficient and figure out different strategies to scale and still keep the essence of our industry, which is independent family owned businesses.
Yeah. And that's the best part of it, right?
Yeah,
Is that, like, I know that there's some big players, Home Depot, Walmart,
sure.
Lowe's, but I mean, they're buying from independent businesses.
Yeah,
And
right.
that's kind of the beauty of it is that in some of these other industries, you would see, that whole vertical chain owned by a company. And I think that
Yeah.
we've done a good job of making sure that we as in the industry members are the
Mhm.
ones holding the keys. And I think that that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And that why I'm here in the industry. I
Right.
think that if it was some kind of, I like to wear a hat, and in corporate world, you can't wear a hat and show up to your customer's place. But if I wear a hat that
Totally
says
agree.
Jax, it totally fits in. So that's the beauty of it.
Yep. Amen. You couldn't have said it better. I also like to wear a hat. I also like this industry for a lot of the same reasons, but do get annoyed at some of the same things, which I'm sure a lot of people do. But Mason, it's always a pleasure getting a chance to chat. We do it a lot. It was fun to do it and hit record in this format. I always learn something new. And I'm sure that our listeners enjoyed this one. So thanks so much for your time today and all that you do for our industry.
Hey, appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, Bill. I gotta make one last chime in. If you're interested in more of these thoughts, there's another podcast that I do tend to listen to called the GH Squad. You might just note that it sounds a little similar.
You might. And your best way to find that is to search it up or go to Instagram at GH Squad Pod. And you might find something there that you like. You just never know. But I appreciate it. And I'm glad that you and your family had a good Easter. And
you too.
We'll get this out. So I think this wraps up our episode of Tech on Demand, but I cannot close without reminding you to subscribe, like, and share the podcast with your peers. There are 250 or more episodes in the archive covering a range of topics, really something for everybody in professional horticulture, garden center retail, landscapes, EA production, and more. And like we said earlier, let's not keep these different segments of the industry fragmented. Let's bring them all together and really see some growth. Take care out there.